Dead Rising is a zombie survival horror franchise created by Capcom. It kicked off in 2006 with the release of the original Dead Rising, an exclusive title for the Xbox 360. It received generally good reviews, but I'll always remember it as the game that had a font size so small, an HD TV was required to read anything on the screen during gameplay. My first time playing it was on a 13-inch CRT screen, so my experience was something like this. On the surface, Dead Rising may seem kind of cliché. I mean, it's about surviving a zombie outbreak inside a shopping mall. And it's true that the game does follow a lot of standard tropes that you see in zombie media, but it complements the darkness of the subject matter with bright, colorful environments and goofy, fun gameplay. This is a game where you can lament a character's grisly death, and then go kill a crowd of zombies with a toy sword, while wearing a pink sundress and a teddy bear mask. Apart from its unique style, Dead Rising has a couple of very interesting game mechanics, the first being photography. One of the main ways of gaining experience is by taking pictures. Points are given based on subject matter and composition, with extra points given for taking pictures of other survivors and special enemies.
Fantastic!
The other interesting mechanic is the importance of the passage of time. All missions in the game must be triggered at the right time and in the right place, and must be completed before they expire. This incentivizes exploration in order to find new missions, and also forces the player to plan ahead so that nothing is missed. Interestingly, letting a main story mission expire does not cause a game-ending failure. Side missions can still be completed and experience can be gained while the time runs out, but you will miss out on uncovering the rest of the story, or as the game calls it, the truth. So here's the story. We play as Frank West, a seasoned freelance photojournalist. Frank is traveling to the town of Willamette, Colorado because of an anonymous tip that something big is happening. When he arrives, he finds inexplicable chaos. He asks his pilot to drop him off at the mall and to return to pick him up in 3 days. Inside the mall, he finds a number of survivors safe inside, having barricaded the entrances. Unfortunately, this safety is short-lived as one of the survivors opens the doors and all hell breaks loose. Frank manages to fight his way to the security control room, the last remaining safe place in the entire mall. Frank finds that he's not the only person of interest here in Willamette. There are 2 Department of Homeland Security agents conducting their own investigation, a crotchety old scientist named Dr. Barnaby, and a pair of mysterious Latin American siblings, Carlito and Isabella Keys. Oh, and also Otis, the mall's friendly and helpful custodian. It turns out that Carlito, with the help of his sister, is the mastermind behind the zombie outbreak. He attempts to kill Dr. Barnaby, who must be then rescued by Frank and the DHS agents. Later, after a chance meeting with Isabella, Frank convinces her that he should tell their story, and she agrees to talk to Carlito about it. While this seems to be the obvious reason for inviting a journalist in the first place, Carlito sees it as a betrayal and tries to kill her, putting her in need of rescue as well. Once Dr. Barnaby and Isabella are safe, the truth comes out. Dr. Barnaby was the head of a secret government research project based in the Keys siblings' hometown of Santa Cabeza, somewhere in Central America. This project's goal was to create larger and more durable livestock. Seriously, it's pretty much presented as, we need bigger cows because fat Americans eat too much fast food. In any case, the project managed to screw up so badly that they created a species of parasitic wasp instead, and that this is the source of the zombie infection. The US military was sent in, and to eliminate the threat as well as any witnesses, they massacred the entirety of Santa Cabeza, somehow missing Carlito and Isabella. Understandably upset, they managed to replicate the work of the scientists and create more of the strange wasps. For their revenge, they hatch a plan to bring the zombie infection back to the United States and to kill Dr. Barnaby with his own creation. Shortly after, Dr. Barnaby does in fact die from zombification, and Isabella tells the rest of the survivors that the outbreak in Willamette is just the beginning. Carlito has planted a bomb underneath the mall with the intention of spreading the infection through the atmosphere over as much of the United States as possible. Isabella has had a change of heart after seeing the effects of the outbreak, and agrees to help Frank and the others stop her brother. Long story short, the bomb is disarmed, Carlito dies, and Otis hijacks a military helicopter to escape with the rest of the survivors. Frank, however, is not quite as lucky. When his own ride shows up, the pilot is attacked by a zombie and crashes the helicopter. Frank collapses in despair. He wakes up to find he has been rescued by Isabella, although he has been infected. With access to Carlito's computer, she believes she can create some type of antidote to cure or at least delay the zombie infection. Frank has to wander the mall to find the equipment she needs, a task made much more difficult by the military cleanup squad that has now shown up. After helping Frank, she mentions something else she found on Carlito's computer. Notes of a plan to infect 50 young orphans and place them in foster care throughout the US as a sort of zombie time bomb. However, this is the first she has heard of such a thing, and isn't sure whether it's real or even if it would work. Frank and Isabella decide they've done all they can at the mall and fight their way through the military and escape. In the end, Frank West publishes the story on the Willamette outbreak and wins a Pulitzer Prize for the book he writes. He becomes something of a hero celebrity, even getting his own TV show, although the limelight quickly fades. While his story is mostly accepted, he is generally labeled as suffering from PTSD and being a conspiracy theorist. His allegations of the government's involvement in Santa Cabeza are pretty much ignored. This brings us to Dead Rising 2, released in 2010 on Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. This story is actually split up into the main game and a prologue and epilogue offered as DLC standalones. The general game mechanics are almost identical to Dead Rising 1, with a couple exceptions. The photography elements have been completely removed, as the main character of Dead Rising 2 is not a photojournalist. And the game has added combo weapons. Combo weapons are the idea that two items can be combined to form a more effective weapon. The types of weapons vary and can be anything from a basic baseball bat plus nails equals a baseball bat with nails in it, to something ridiculous like combining a flashlight and gemstones to create a fully functioning lightsaber. Combo weapons give extra experience when they are used, add more variety to gameplay, and give some use to items that might otherwise be seen as useless. There is actually one other new mechanic, but that'll come up in just a minute. The prologue, called Dead Rising Case Zero, takes place 2 years after the events of Dead Rising 1. Chuck Green, a professional motocross rider, is in Las Vegas with his wife, Pam, and his 4-year-old daughter, Katie, when an outbreak occurs. The outbreak starts at the venue where Chuck is competing, and his wife is infected and killed, turning into a zombie and biting Katie before Chuck can rescue her. Chuck takes his daughter and flees the city, but finds himself stranded in the nearby town of Still Creek. Chuck attempts to rescue survivors while collecting parts needed to build himself a motorcycle so he can escape the impending military quarantine. Now you may be asking, what about his daughter? If she's been infected, then surely she'll turn into a zombie. This is the introduction to the other new mechanic in the game, Zombrex. Zombrex is a drug manufactured by the company Phoenitrans, which suppresses the zombie infection and can indefinitely stop a person from turning, but only if the drug is taken at regular intervals. In Case Zero, Chuck must find enough Zombrex to give to Katie every 12 hours. Chuck finishes building his motorcycle and escapes with Katie just as the military closes in. 3 years after Case Zero, Chuck and Katie find themselves in Fortune City, basically a replacement for Las Vegas, which was destroyed to contain the outbreak. Chuck is competing in a popular game show called Terror is Reality, hosted by the larger-than-life personality Tyrone TK King. The point of Terror is Reality is to kill as many zombies as possible, in this case specifically with motorcycles with chainsaws attached. Chuck isn't really a fan of the competition, but it gets him the most money for his skills, and it turns out constant doses of Zombrex aren't cheap. After the show, when Chuck goes to pick up Katie, shit hits the fan as the zombies are let loose. Chuck finds his daughter and manages to get to an emergency shelter built beneath the casinos. Shortly after the shelter is sealed, a news report comes on the television claiming that Chuck Green himself is responsible for the outbreak. Now with the help of Stacy Forsyth, a zombie rights activist, and Sullivan, the security guard in charge of the shelter, Chuck must venture back into the city to rescue survivors, prove his innocence, and of course, find Zombrex for Katie. In his travels around Fortune City, Chuck runs into Rebecca Chang, the reporter who originally aired the story claiming Chuck caused the outbreak. He tells his side of the story, and Rebecca agrees to help him try and dig up some evidence to back it up. What they find is the security room and all its surveillance equipment shot up and destroyed. While that doesn't prove anything, it's enough to convince her that things are not what they seem. Back at the shelter, Stacy has been following some activity on the monitors there. It appears that someone is attempting to rob the casinos. Chuck foils the robberies and finds that it was none other than TK orchestrating the heist. When he tries to escape by helicopter, Chuck causes it to crash and brings the unconscious TK back to the emergency shelter. The military arrives to try and rescue survivors, but a strange green gas starts being pumped into the city. When the zombies contact the gas, they change and become stronger, tougher, and more aggressive. These new zombies wipe out the military force, which means the government's next plan will be to firebomb the city. While Chuck and the other survivors are busy, TK attempts to escape, opening the doors and letting zombies into the shelter. Chuck manages to get the doors closed, but in the process TK gets bitten by one of the zombies. TK claims that he is the one behind framing Chuck for the outbreak, but not behind the outbreak itself. Someone else is responsible and merely hired TK to do some of the dirty work. He pleads for Zombrex, but none of the survivors is particularly forthcoming in helping him. Chuck starts investigating the strange gas by heading into the maintenance tunnels beneath the city. He finds lots of the mutated zombies, but they're acting strangely, as if they're being attracted to something. Following the crowd of zombies, he finds some sort of strange scientific equipment that kills the zombies. After investigating, he finds that the facility is run by Phoenatrans, the makers of Zombrex. The gas causes the wasp parasite inside the zombies to fully mature, and the machine under the city harvests them. He brings this information and a satellite phone back to the other survivors. Rebecca uses the phone to call her station and to ask for helicopters to pick the survivors up. But before she can complete the call, Sullivan shoots her in the head. It seems that Sullivan has been working for Phoenatrans the whole time. He takes all the evidence and the satellite phone and runs off. Chuck, of course, chases him down to prevent him from escaping and to retrieve the information to clear his name. In true villain fashion, Sullivan explains the whole evil plan. Phoenatrans causes these outbreaks, including Fortune City and Las Vegas, because they need the Wasp Queens in order to make Zombrex. The fact that every zombie outbreak creates more infected survivors who are dependent on buying Zombrex is just a secondary perk. Chuck defeats Sullivan by causing him to be ripped in half by his own skyhook extraction. He redials the satellite phone and tells the news station they can have all the evidence he's gathered in exchange for rescue helicopters. The choppers show up, and just as Stacy and Katie are boarding, Chuck is ambushed by a zombified TK and pulled back into an elevator. Just before the elevator doors close, he tells Stacy to take care of his daughter. And that's where the game ends. The epilogue begins with Chuck fighting the zombie TK in the elevator. Chuck is wearing down and won't last much longer, when the doors open and he is rescued by none other than Frank West. For this reason, the epilogue is known as Dead Rising Case West. Frank was supposed to be meeting Rebecca to investigate a nearby Phoenatrans facility. Frank has an inside source who told him he would find a story there. Since Rebecca is dead, he invites Chuck to come along and maybe find more evidence against Phoenatrans. They break into the facility, and Frank's source, who they can only communicate with via computer, releases all the zombies to distract the facility's security. Chuck and Frank explore the area, gathering evidence and attempting to facilitate the meeting and extraction of their source. When they finally meet the source, it turns out to be Isabella Keyes. She claims that working for Phoenatrans to create Zombex was her only way to escape prison, and that she has nothing to do with the outbreaks. In fact, Isabella says she has been trying to develop a complete cure for the zombie infection, but Phoenatrans has stolen her work, not wanting to cure a disease they profit from. At this point, they are confronted by the facility's director, Marion Mallon, and it turns out she's kind of a mean lady. She orders security to capture Isabella and kill Frank and Chuck. When they prove difficult to kill, she leaves with Isabella and activates a self-destruct system for the facility. Frank and Chuck escape, but don't end up with any of the evidence that Isabella promised them. In the end, they did have enough evidence to prove that Chuck was innocent and had no involvement in the Fortune City outbreak. However, the evidence against Phoenatrans is a little bit shakier. It's hard to tell whether it's because nobody wants to trash the company that makes a drug so many people are dependent on, or because Chuck is seen as biased, having a grudge against the company. But Phoenatrans suffers no immediate losses due to the story. Of course, this could change in time. Fortune City wasn't the first zombie outbreak, and it won't be the last.